بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So inshallah we've arrived at the last lesson. So inshallah we'll try and finish this today as well before Maghrib inshallah. So then we arrive at the last lesson where the Shaykh is entitled this last chapter في بيان نماذج أو في بيان نماذج من البدع المعاصرة. So he's been for the last few lessons we've been talking about religious innovations, what they are, how they come about, why they're wrong, the evidence is related to it. And now the Shaykh is going to talk about some examples of modern day religious innovations which are in our time. So we'll go through these and we'll see that if not most of them we'll be aware of. If we're not, then we've learned something new inshallah. The Shaykh he says وهي الأول الاحتفال بالمولد النبوي. الثاني التبرك بالأماكن والآثار والأموات ونحو ذلك. والثالث البدع في مجال العبادات والتقرب إلى الله. So these are the three things that he's going to talk about today inshallah. And the first of those types of religious innovations are celebrating the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's birthday. Number two, seeking blessings from places or things, objects, and the dead, and the likes of that. And number three, the religious innovation in regards to the places of worship and seeking nearness to Allah. So these are the three topics that inshallah is covered in this chapter, and we'll try to get through this today inshallah. The Shaykh he says البدع المعاصرة كثيرة بحكم تأخر الزمن وقلة العلم وكثرة الدعاة إلى البدع والمخالفات وسريان التشبه بالكفار في عاداتهم وطقوسهم مصداقا لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم لتتبعن سنن من كان قبلكم. So then the Shaykh opens this chapter with this paragraph, and he says that the religious innovations that are happening in our time, there are many. With the wisdom, why are they many? With the wisdom of towards the end of time, as time goes on, in the later time period that we're living in, because of that, one, and two, because of the lack of knowledge, and because of many people, so-called callers, calling to these religious innovations. They're encouraging people to practice these religious innovations, and they're going against the Quran and the Sunnah. And so by going against the Quran and Sunnah, they're taking on the traditions and ways of the disbelievers in their habits and in how they do things. Yeah. And the Shaykh he brings part of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ said that you are going to follow the ways of the people before you, i.e. the people of the book and the people before Islam. yeah, before the coming of the Prophet ﷺ. And we can see that today it doesn't really need a lot of explanation or a lengthy discussion. We can see that with our own eyes today, sadly. So the Shaykh, he says, Al-ihtifalu بمناسبة المولد النبوي في ربيع الأول. So the first thing he's going to discuss, so the topic is regarding celebrating the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's birthday. And obviously we know it's a bid'ah, it's a religious innovation, it's haram, it's not allowed. So he talks about here, he says, in Rabi al-Awwal, as we know, yeah, where you see all these lights and flashing lights and people doing weird things that have nothing to do with the religion. Depending on where you live, you might see it, you might not, but certainly where we live, we do see these things. So the Shaykh says, وَهُوَ تَشَبُّهٌ بِالنَّصَارَى فِي عَمَلٍ ما يسمى بالاحتفال بمولد المسيح فيحتفل جهلة المسلمين أو العلماء المضلين في ربيع الأول من كل سنة مناسبة مولد الرسول محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. فمنهم من يقيم هذا الاحتفال في المساجد ومنهم من يقيمه في البيوت أو الأمكنة المعدة لذلك ويحضر جموع كثيرة من دهماء الناس وعوامهم يعملون ذلك تشبها بالنصارى في ابتداعهم الاحتفال بمولد المسيح عليه السلام. والغالب أن هذا الاحتفال علاوة على كونه بدعة وتشبها بالنصارى لا يخلو من وجود الشركيات والمنكرات كإنشاد القصائد التي فيها الغلو في حق الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى درجة دعائه من دون الله والاستغاثة به. وقد نهى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الغلو في مدحه فقال لا تطروني كما أطرت النصارى ابن مريم إنما أنا عبد فقولوا عبد الله ورسوله or Abdullah wa Rasuluhu. So then in this long paragraph, the Shaykh, he talks about the Prophet's birthday, and he says that this is following the way of the Christians in their actions, the same thing that they do with Christmas. This is what Muslims, not all, but a lot of them who are affected by this religious innovation are doing. They're practicing, they're copying them. And they're celebrating a birthday, and they're doing it in Rabi al-Awwal, and they party, and the Shaykh says that these are the ignoramuses of the Muslims, and the so-called scholars that are misguided, the misguided ones who are misguiding the masses, and they do this in Rabi al-Awwal as mentioned, and they do it every year. With regard to whenever obviously the birthday falls. Obviously that's another issue altogether. As we know, the scholars have come to a consensus that the date is not known. We know it's it's known that it's in Rabiul Awwal, but the specific date itself is not known. So how can you celebrate something that's not been agreed upon, by scholarly consensus? That's another thing. So they literally, it's like a double-edged sword for them, really. So then the Shaykh, he goes on to say, so from them are those who they establish these parties, birthday parties of theirs, in the mosques, and from them are those who do it within the houses, and from them are those who do it in certain places that they've designated. And then he says that many people attend these gatherings, many people from the general folk, the lay people, and they're copying and they carry out and they're copying what the Christians do at Christmas. In their bid'ah, the same thing going on here. that what the Christians practice with regard to the birthday of Isa alayhi salam. And the Shaykh, he goes on to say, he says here, وَالْغَالِبُ أَنَّ هَذَا الْاحْتِفَالِ is, he says, and in addition to these parties that they're doing in terms of birthday parties, and that we know that this itself is a bid'ah, then they're also copying they're following the footsteps of the Christians as well. And not just that, then they fall into all types of shirkiyat, all types of polytheism, evil acts as well on top of it. It's a compound thing. One thing leads to another, and they're doing so many evil acts, it's unbelievable. And the Shaykh brings some examples. He says, for example, that they'll be, reciting nasheeds, so-called poetry, etc. And in those that they are reciting, in those verses that they are reciting, there is extremism in terms of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where they reach levels of evilness that reaches shirk, polytheism. And there's references to various qasidas and stuff, like qasida burda is full of by Busayri is full of shirk. And whoever is unaware of it, if they know what Tawheed is and they know what shirk is, if they read that, they will automatically realize what is this, and how come they'll be shocked that people are reading this and reciting it, willfully, without realizing that it's full of shirk. And then the Shaykh, he goes on to say, so then from these anashid that they have, they are full of shirk, such as things like obviously calling directly, doing dua to the Prophet, supplicating to the Prophet ﷺ, asking him for things, yeah, and also seeking aid as well from the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from this kind of extremism in his and also extremism in praising him as well, because one extreme leads to another extreme, and it's just a long chain of problems. Then that lead to more problems and more problems. So, for example, the Shaykh brings the hadith that we read in Arabic, where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Don't praise me. Don't go into extremes. Do not go into extremes in praising me, like the Christians praised the son of Mary, i.e. Isa alayhi salam. He said, indeed, verily or indeed, I am a slave. So say, the slave of Allah and his messenger." This is what the Prophet ﷺ told us. Don't go into extreme. Then the Shaykh explains here what that means. So he says, الإطراء معناه الغلو في المدح وربما يعتقدون أن الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم يحضر الاحتفالاتهم ومن المنكرات التي تصاحب هذه الاحتفالات الأناشيد الجماعية المنغمة وضرب الطبول وغير ذلك من عمل الأذكار الصوفية المبتدعة، وقد يكون فيه اختلاط بين الرجال والنساء مما يسبب الفتنة ويجر إلى الوقوع في الفواحش. وحتى لو خلا هذا الاحتفال ولو خلا هذا الاحتفال من هذه المحاذير واقتصر على الاجتماع وتناول الطعام وإظهار الفرح كما يقولون، فإنه بدعة محدثة وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة، وأيضا هو وسيلة إلى أن يتطور ويحصل فيه ما يحصل في الاحتفالات الأخرى من المنكرات. So then the Shaykh says in this following paragraph, and he explains, he says that itra, this word itra that we read in the hadith, it's going into extremes with regard to praise. And he says, and then he goes on to explain, he says, maybe, they believe also that these people are falling into this bid'ah of the Prophet's birthday. They also may believe that the messenger is actually present. So they may even believe that the messenger is present within their parties and gatherings. And from the evils that accompany these gatherings and parties are these group recitations of the poems that are that are full of shirk and evil, as mentioned earlier, and also playing instruments, beating on the instruments as well, which we know this is all haram. And other than that, from the other actions such as supplications, innovated supplications that they will bring that have no reference from the to the Quran or the Sunnah, made up things full of shirk, full of bid'ah, full of evil. And also there may be situations in their parties and gatherings where there's a mixing between men and women, which then is a reason that leads to more fitna and that drags people into falling into immoral acts. So this is what the Shaykh brings, and he mentions here. And even if it is just sitting down and just eating food only, and showing that you're pleased, and all that, is still a bid'ah. It is a bid'ah, a newly invented matter in the religion that has no basis within the religion of Islam. There's no evidence from the Quran, Sunnah, or the Sahaba, or the three virtuous generations, or whoever followed them in goodness, that all of it is evil. Then the Shaykh, he moves on, he says, وَقُلْنَا إِنَّهُ بِدْعَةٌ لِأَنَّهُ لَا أَصْلَ لَهُ فِي الْكِتَابِ وَسُنَّةِ وعمل السلف الصالح والقرون المفضلة، وإنما حدث متأخرا بعد القرن الرابع الهجري، أحدثه الفاطميون الشيعة. قال الإمام أبو حفص تاج الدين الفاكهاني رحمه الله: أما بعد، فقد تكرر سؤال جماعة من المباركين عن الاجتماع الذي يعمله بعض الناس في شهر الربيع الأول ويسمونه المولد، هل له أصل في الدين؟ وقصد الجواب عن ذلك مبين والإيضاح عنه معينا. فقلت: وبالله التوفيق، لا أعلم لهذا المولد أصلا في كتاب ولا سنة، ولا ينقل عمله عن أحد من العلماء الأمة الذين هم القدوة في الدين المتمسكون بآثار المتقدمين، بل هو بدعة أحدثها البطالون وشهوة نفس اغتنى بها الأكالون. So then in this paragraph the Shaykh says, and he says, we've said that it's a bid'ah, it's a religious innovation, and that it has no foundation in the book or the Sunnah, in the deen. And the Salaf, the rightly guided Salaf, the righteous predecessors, never practiced it. The virtuous generations, nobody practiced it. And indeed it came about in the 4th century, in the 4th century after Hijrah. It came way after, in the 4th century after Hijrah, outside of the three virtuous generations, or those 3 centuries. And who brought it about? So this is very important to understand as well. It's good. The Shaykh says that the people who brought it about were the Fatimids, the Shia, called, it's a sect of Shiism called Fatimids or Fatimiyya. They brought it around, and one of the scholars of old, Abu Hafs Tajuddin al-Fakihani, may Allah have mercy upon him, he said Amma Ba'd, and he said that this question has been repeated, has been oft repeated regarding this issue about the birthday of the Prophet, this Mawlid al-Nabi. And he says, just summarizing this paragraph, he says that there's no foundation in the religion. That's the answer, that there's no foundation in the religion with regards to this practice. It's made up. It has no basis. And then he goes back to what the Shaykh said earlier as well. And he said, and with Allah's success, he says, I don't know with regard to this celebration, this birthday, the celebration of the Prophet's birthday, that it has no foundation from the Quran or the Sunnah, nor has it been related from any of the scholars that are an example. He's talking about the Salaf in the deen, and those who hold steadfast and hold to the Quran and the Sunnah and the Salaf. I said rather it is a religious innovation that the useless ones, uh, the ones who have nothing, basically saying in this way that the ones who have nothing, they're devoid of anything, they've brought it about, and it's a bid'ah, a religious innovation, and it's a desire. It's a selfish type of desire that the ones who they like also for the people who gather to eat. It's just they're sitting there eating and doing all kinds of evil acts. It has no basis in the religion. So then the Shaykh, he goes on to say, he says, وقال شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية رحمه الله وكذلك ما يحدثه بعض الناس إما مضاحاة للنصارى في ميلاد عيسى عليه السلام وإما محبة للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تعظيما من اتخاذ مولد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عيدا مع اختلاف الناس في مولده فإن هذا لم يفعله السلف ولو كان هذا خيرا محضا وراجحا لكان السلف رضي الله عنهم أحق به منا. So I'll just stop here and we'll go through it bit by bit, so I'm not reading in Arabic for long periods of time. So then the Shaykh brings Shaykh Saleh Fawzan Hafidhullah, may Allah preserve him, he brings the speech of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah have mercy upon him. And in this first part of the paragraph, the Shaykh, he says that this act of celebrating the Prophet's birthday, whichever angle it may come from, whether it's for the love of the Prophet or whether it's just copying what the Christians did and just following suit with it, there is no basis from it, from the Quran or the Sunnah or from the Salaf, as also mentioned by the other Shaykh when he was quoted. Then he says here towards the end of the first half of this paragraph, he says that if it was the case, the Sahaba would have been the first people doing it. The Sahaba would have been the first people getting up and celebrating it, but they didn't because it's not from the deen. Yeah. So then the Shaykh continues, he says, فإنهم كانوا أشد محبة للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تعظيما له منا. And what is it? It's because why would they do it first? Why? Because they always will have more love for the Prophet ﷺ than anybody else, and because of that they would have done it, but they didn't do it because it's not from the deen. Yeah. Then the Shaykh says, وَهُمْ عَلَى الْخَيْرِ أَحْرَص, and they are upon good, like they are more steadfast in doing good. They'll be the first ones. They would always beat anybody else to doing good. That was their nature. وإنما كان محبته وتعظيمه في متابعته وطاعته واتباع أمره وإحياء سنته باطنا وظاهرا ونشر ما بعث به والجهاد على ذلك بالقلب واليد واللسان. So then the Shaykh, he says here that indeed the true love of the Prophet ﷺ and magnifying the Prophet ﷺ is how do you do it? In actual fact, is following him and obeying him and following his commands and reviving his sunnah within and in the apparent, and spreading that which he was sent with, and striving in that with your heart, with your hands and with your tongue. So physically, through speech, through action, and through your heart. Then he said, فَإِنَّ هَذِهِ طريقة السابقين الأولين من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان انتهى ببعض اختصار. So then the Shaykh says, for indeed that is the way of the predecessors, the ones, the first, from the Muhajirin and the Ansar. Yeah, the Muhajirin, the Quraysh, yeah, from the Quraysh and the Ansar, Aus wal Khazraj, yeah, in Medina. And here is the important bit also, and whosoever follows them in good. So whoever does that from us, then we're part of that. We're part of that chain. And then the Shaykh says that this is a summary that finishes there. So then he continues, he says, وقد ألف في إنكار هذه البدعة كتب ورسائل قديمة وحديثة وهو علاوة على كونه بدعة وتشبها فإنه يجر إلى إقامة موالد أخرى كموالد الأولياء والمشايخ والزعماء فيفتح أبواب شر كثيرة. So then the Shaykh says here as well, he says that there have been many books refuting this bid'ah, books of old and books of new, right? So books in our time and books of old in the past as well, that and many treatises and books written about this, clarifying the position, the correct position, and refuting this innovation. And the Shaykh says, in addition to the nature of this being a bid'ah and obviously following in the footsteps of the disbelievers, namely the Christians, for example, he says indeed it also drags people into doing more, into establishing other birthdays, for example, like the birthdays of so-called awliya, righteous people, sheikhs, scholars, or people in high positions, well-known positions, powerful people. This is the thing, because one evil, it ends up leading to more and more and more. It's like a chain reaction. It doesn't stop. And the Shaykh says it opens the doors to much evil. So this is with regard to the first point that the Shaykh talked about, which is the bid'ah or the religious innovation of celebrating the Prophet's birthday. Second, number 2, التبرك بالأماكن والآثار والأشخاص أحياء وأموات. Now this section also sadly is widespread, and is seeking blessings in certain places, from certain things, objects, what have you, and people, alive or dead. And this is a topic that we need to understand properly, so we don't get confused, because obviously the people who practice these sort of things, they carry doubts, and if you're not sure, you get confused, and this is the whole point of going through this book, inshallah. So then the Shaykh says, من البدع المحدثة التبرك بالمخلوقين. And he says, from the innovations, the newly invented matters and innovations in the religion, is seeking blessings from the creation. وهو لون من ألوان الوثنية وشبكة يصطاد بها المرتزقة أموال السذج من الناس وثزج من الناس. والتبرك طلب البركة وهي ثبوت الخير في الشيء وزيادته، وطلب ثبوت الخير وزيادته إنما يكون ممن يملك ذلك ويقدر عليه وهو الله سبحانه. So let's stop there, and we'll translate that, inshallah. So then the Shaykh, he says, and this type of bid'ah, it comes in different flavors or colors, let's say, and it's a different types of colors related to idol worship, or worshipping objects, and it's a net that people who are seeking to also make money as well. It's like think of it as mercenaries trying to make their money, because a lot of people, it's like a business as well, and it tricks the lay person into doing things, and paying for things. They think that I'm barakah in it, and they're selling it, and they're buying it, thinking that, oh yeah, I can seek blessings from such and such a thing. Then the Shaykh says, At-Tabarruk is I'll explain it in English anyway, but the Shaykh, he says, it's seeking blessings and goodness from a thing. So that's what essentially is being done. And the Shaykh mentions here that that's only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we seek blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no one else. That's a given, yeah. Then the Shaykh, he goes on to say, فهو الذي ينزل فهو الذي ينزل البركة ويثبتها. أما المخلوق فإنه لا يقدر على منح البركة وإيجادها ولا على إبقائها وتثبيتها. فالتبرك بالأماكن والآثار والأشخاص أحياء وأموات لا يجوز، لأنه إما شرك إن اعتقد أن ذلك الشيء يمنح البركة، أو وسيلة إلى الشرك إن اعتقد أن زيادته وملامسته والتمسح به سبب لحصولها من الله. So let's just take a pause there. Then the Shaykh says, as for the creation doesn't possess anything with regard to giving blessings. They can't give blessings and can't bring about blessings, nor can give blessings, and they can't even remain upon it and remain upon that. The Shaykh says, so seeking blessings from particular places or particular objects or things or people, whether they are alive or dead, is not permissible, i.e. is haram. Because why? He says because either it's shirk straight up, if the person believes that that thing that they are seeking blessings from can actually bring about blessings and give and bestow upon them blessings, or it leads, if they don't believe like that, it leads to shirk. It will lead to shirk. If he thinks that there may be, if he goes there, that it will increase him. If he touches it, it will increase his blessings. Not necessarily coming from that place, but he believes that if he goes to this place or does this thing with such an object or whatever it might be, or person, that his blessings will increase. Yeah? Because of him doing that particular action. So he believes, so in this situation, the person believes that the blessings come from Allah ultimately, but he's using an intermediary here, believing that it will increase his blessings, which then eventually will lead to shirk. And that's a dangerous situation to be in anyway. Nobody should want to be in that situation. Then the Shaykh goes on, وَأَمَّا مَا كَانَ الصَّحَابَةُ يَفْعَلُونَهُ مِنَ التَّبَرُّكِ بشعر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وريقه ومن فصل من جسمه كما تقدم، فذلك خاص به صلى الله عليه وسلم في حال حياته ووجوده بينهم، بدليل أن الصحابة لم يكونوا يتبركون بهجرته وقبره وبعد موته. So now we need to pay attention to this bit. Then the Shaykh, he says, and as for what the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them, used to do with regard to seeking blessings by the hair of the Prophet ﷺ, or like for example his sweat and things like this, as we know, and what came from his body, then this is specific. We need to understand this. This is specific to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his lifetime and in his presence when he was alive, between the Sahaba and him, with the evidence that the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they did not do that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away. They stopped it. And they weren't going to certain places where the Prophet ﷺ would be, going to those places and sitting there and doing stuff there. They didn't do none of this stuff. And they didn't do any of that. This is what the Shaykh mentioned. So this is the important thing to understand and distinguish, so we understand the true matter from people try to trick people into believing certain things. Then the Shaykh says, وَكَذَلِكَ مَقَامَاتَ الْأَوْلِيَاءِ مِنْ بَابِ أَوْلَى وَلَمْ يَكُونُوا يَتَبَرَّكُونَ بِالْأَشْخَاصِ الصَّالِحِينَ كَأَبِي بَكْرٍ. And also from the point of view of righteous people. So he didn't see any of the Sahaba also doing the same thing with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar radiallahu anhu. They didn't. They weren't doing this, none of this. And other than them, from the virtuous Sahaba, Yeah, from the cream of the crop of the Sahaba. Not in their life, and not even after their death. Not even in their lifetime, and not after their death. This is with regard to other than the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah. Then the Shaykh, he moves on. He says, وَلَمْ يَكُونُوا يذهبون إلى غار حراء لا يصلوا ليصلوا فيه أو يدعوا ولم يكونوا يذهبون إلى الطور الذي كلم الله عليه موسى ليصلوا فيه ويدعوا أو إلى غير هذه الأمكنة من الجبال التي يقال إن فيها مقامات الأنبياء أو غيرهم ولا إلى مشهد مبني على أثر نبي من الأنبياء. وأيضا فإن المكان الذي كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي فيه بالمدينة النبوية دائما لم يكن أحد من السلف يستلمه ولا يقبله ولا الموضع الذي صلى فيه بمكة وغيرها. فإذا كان الموضع الذي كان يطؤه بقدميه الكريم ويصلي عليه لم يشرع لأمته التمسح به ولا تقبيله فكيف بما يقال إن غيره صلى فيه أو نام عليه. فتقبيل الشيء من ذلك والتمسح به قد علم العلماء بالاضطرار من دين الإسلام أن هذا ليس من شريعته صلى الله عليه وسلم. So then the Shaykh, he goes on to say in this paragraph that also the Sahaba, they didn't go to like Mount Hira to pray there or into the cave. They didn't go there to pray there. They didn't go there to supplicate there. They didn't go to for example the place and the mountain, the hills where the mountain where Allah spoke to Musa alayhi salam. They didn't go there. They didn't supplicate there. They didn't go to these places. They didn't do these things. And they didn't go to other places either to do these kinds of acts. Where there's history where the prophets and the messengers were in these places, and they wouldn't go to a place that was built or had some kind of like objects and things. They wouldn't go. They wouldn't supplicate. They didn't do none of this stuff, as the Shaykh has been talking about. This is what the Shaykh mentions in this paragraph, and that the Salaf never did this. They weren't upon this. No, like was going to certain places and kissing certain objects and doing all these kind of things. They didn't do these sort of things. So this is what the Shaykh has mentioned here. Like touching objects, kissing them, and doing things that other people do. They didn't do none of this kind of thing. And this was obviously in opposition to the Sharia. Yeah. Then the last subject here, we should be able to finish this in the next, hopefully 10 minutes before Maghrib, inshallah. So the last point that the Shaykh mentions here on the topic he discusses is the innovation with regard to places of worship and seeking nearness to Allah. He says, البدع التي أحدثت في مجال العبادات في هذا الزمان كثيرة والأصل في العبادات التوقيف فلا يشرع شيء منها إلا بدليل وما لم يدل عليه دليل فهو بدعة لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم من عمل عملا ليس عليه أمرنا فهو رد. So then in this opening paragraph, the Shaykh, he says that the innovation that's crept in and has been spread and is a newly invented religious act in the religion is the places of worship in our time are many. He says here that the foundation principles. This is good, important principle to understand. He says the principle with regard to worship, when it comes to worshipping itself, the actual act of worshipping, is tawqif. What does that mean? It means that it's taken from the Quran or the authentic Sunnah. You can't do an act of worship except that you have a clear-cut evidence from the Quran or the authentic Sunnah. Otherwise, it's not accepted. So there has to be an evidence from the Quran and Sunnah, right? This is a foundational principle with regards to worship, and it's called at-tawqifiyya. yeah, in Arabic, meaning that you stop. That's where you stop. We stop where Allah said and where the Prophet ﷺ said. That's where we stop. We don't start going, oh well, we can do this or we can do that, or start conjuring up our own ideas. It doesn't work like that. So then the Shaykh brings an evidence, and this was mentioned a few times in the previous lessons, in the recent few lessons, which we just read in Arabic. Whoever does an action that is not from our affair, meaning the Deen, Al-Islam, it is rejected. It goes back to the person who invented it. So this is clear-cut evidence for us, right? That with regard to the brevity and the dangerousness of newly invented matters. Then the Shaykh goes on to say, والعبادات التي تمارس الآن ولا دليل عليها كثيرة جدا منها الجهر بالنية بالصلاة. So he's going to go through a few examples for us, inshallah, of some of the popular, widespread religious innovations that happen in our time. So he says, so some of these religious innovations that are practiced in our time are many, and he says from them are the following. He says, saying your niyyah, so saying your intention on your tongue, outwardly, on the apparent, when you are praying. For example, he says, when someone says, I intend to pray I intend to pray 4 fard, this and the other. And the Shaykh, he says here, بأن يقول نويت أن أصلي لله كذا وكذا وهذه بدعة لأنه ليس من سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ولأن الله تعالى يقول قل أتعلمون الله بدينكم والله يعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض والله بكل شيء عليم. And that's from Surah Al-Hujurat verse 16. والنية محلها القلب فهي عمل قلبي لا عمل لساني ومنها الذكر الجماعي بعد الصلاة لأن المشروع أن كل شخص يقول الذكر الواردة منفردا ومنها طلب قراءة الفاتحة في المناسبات وبعد الدعاء وللأموات ومنها إقامة المآتم على الأموات وصناعة الأطعمة واستئجار المقرئين يزعمون أن ذلك من باب العزاء أو أن ذلك ينفع الميت وكل ذلك بدع لا أصل لها وآصال وأغلال ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان. So then the Shaykh, he mentions here, and he goes on to say that the intention of the prayer, when people like say, I'm going to pray 4 fard for Dhuhr, like this, when they're saying it outward openly, this is bid'ah. Why? Because he says that the intention, its place is in the heart. The intention always, it starts in the heart and it's there. And what's the evidence as well? He brings the evidence from Surah Al-Hujurat. Let me see. Let me pull this up. Bear with me a second. Surah Al-Hujurat, the meaning of the ayah that we read in Arabic. Say, will you inform Allah about your religion, while Allah knows all that is in the heavens and all that is in the earth, and Allah is all aware of everything. So this is evidence that the Shaykh has brought. And he says that the intention, this place is in the heart. And he also says, and also from these other acts, these innovations, religious innovations, is the supplication that people make after their prayer, where the Imam, this is sadly, this happens, it's widespread, where the Imam turns around after the prayer facing the people and raises their hands and they all do a group dua. This is also bid'ah because it's not from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the way they do it after every single salah, and it's not in the Sharia. And that really, what's the foundation here and the evidence is that the person should pray and make his own supplication with regard to the supplications that have come in the Quran and the authentic Sunnah. And the scholars also talk about this. I'll add this as an extra point. Scholars talk about that the whole point of the prayer, is the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what is the prayer? It's remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and it's asking Him. The prayer itself is full of dhikr and dua. Not really, there's no real need to actually even supplicate after, because you should have really have supplicated and made all your supplications during your movements, in all the various movements within the prayer as well. So that's something to know. And then the Shaykh goes on to say, also from the innovations that are widespread today, he says that where people request the reading or the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha in certain instances and in certain situations, and doing dua for the dead. And this happens a lot and it's widespread. There's no evidence for it. It's a religious innovation and it's sinful. And also where they establish funerals, al-ma'atim or ta'ziyas, where people die, and they organize gatherings for those dead people, and they'll make food, and they'll rent a play. They will, I wouldn't say rent here, but in English it's probably better to say they would hire reciters that would recite, and they think that they would, that this recitation of the Quran or whatever it might be is going to benefit the dead, and such and such. These are all from the popular bid'ahs that are in our time, the religious innovations, sadly, that are in our time, and that they have no authority to do this. Yeah, they have no authority from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do any of this. They've got nothing to stand on. There's no basis for it. Then finally the Shaykh says, ومنها الاحتفال بالمناسبات الدينية كمناسبة الإسراء والمعراج ومناسبة الهجرة النبوية وهذا الاحتفال بتلك المناسبات لا أصل له في الشرع. ومن ذلك ما يفعل في شهر رجب كالعمرة الرجبية وما يفعل فيه من العبادات الخاصة به كالتطوع بالصلاة والصيام فيه خاصة، فإنه لا ميزة له على غيره من الشهور لا في العمرة والصيام والصلاة والذبح للنسك فيه ولا غير ذلك. So then in this paragraph the Shaykh says, he also mentions things like it was during the night journey and ascension in the month of Sha'ban, Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, where people specify the days like the 15th, and they are like, increasing in worship and doing all these things, and they have parties and gatherings. Also, for example, specifying umrahs in Rajab as well. So things like Rajab, umrahs in Rajab, it's Rajab, the month of Rajab. So umrahs in Rajab, and other than that they specify and try to make it a particular thing to do with Isra or Mi'raj, and then voluntary acts such as voluntary prayer, voluntary fasting, and they try to attach some kind of specificity to that month where they don't actually have any evidence from the Quran or the Sunnah at all, and that in fact all of that they do, there's no it's not special in regards to that. If you did it out of in another month, there's no difference. It holds no additional value, but they attach this to it because of the innovations that they follow. Then the Shaykh goes on to say, ومن ذلك الأذكار الصوفية بأنواعها كلها بدء ومحدثات لأنها مخالفة للأذكار المشروعة في صيغها وهيئاتها وأوقاتها. So then also the other things that the Shaykh mentions is like from the supplications of the Sufiya. This is a popular one with the Sufiya. The supplications that they use and the types of supplication that they have, all of it is newly invented and religious innovation. And why? Because of what it goes against the legislated remembrances that are from the Quran and the Sunnah, and that the things that it contains of shirk and evil and other things that the Shaykh mentioned earlier as well, and that the types of how they go about it, do this 1,000 times, you do that 100,000 times, and they got all this weird stuff that has no basis, and also specific times as well that they attach. So all these things that they bring about, they have no evidence for it, and so therefore it's bid'ah. And then towards the end of this, the Shaykh he says, وَمِنْ ذَلِكَ تَخْصِيص لَيْلَةَ النِّصْفِ مِنْ شَعْبَانِ. We mentioned this already, where the Shaykh mentions about the 15th of Sha'ban. So there's Rajab, they've got the issue about Rajab, what I mentioned earlier, not to mix up, and then they also specify the 15th of Sha'ban do to do specific acts of worship which they don't have any authority from the Quran or the Sunnah to actually specify that day. And rather, the Prophet ﷺ, as we know, used to increase in worship in all of Sha'ban. So it's not it's a specific day. And other than that, the Shaykh mentions here, and I'll just summarize these two paragraphs as well, and then we finish the book, inshallah. So I want to do that now, just before Maghrib. And the Shaykh says that regarding religious innovations, that the kuffar, that it leads to kufr, that religious innovations, they eventually lead to kufr. It's a pathway and a facilitation to disbelief, and it is an extra thing in the deen that Allah has not given permission to do, or has not commanded us to do, or nor has the Prophet ﷺ commanded us to do, and it is evil, and it's sinful, and it's a major sin. And the Shaykh says that the shaitan, he's happy, he's pleased when people fall into this bid'ah. Why? Why? Because the person thinks he's doing something good. He thinks he's doing acts of worship, and he'll continue and continue and continue, but yet he's actually sinning. Whereas the person who falls into a major sin, he knows that that's a major sin and he can repent from it at any time. That person's better than the innovator, because the innovator is going to think he's doing good things and he's just going to carry on and carry on. In fact, he might even exceed and keep doing more and more and more of it. So this is what the Shaykh mentions here. And what happens ultimately, the person falling into these innovations is earning the anger of Allah and Allah's punishment, and that is misleading the person and diverting and is deceiving the person and is corrupting the person's deen. Then the Shaykh, in this final paragraph, now we finished here, how he mentions, he entitles it, how do we deal with or how do we work with these people of bid'ah? What's our position? Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. When he says here that the people who the people of bid'ah, then we don't sit with them except if we're going to advise them, or we are refuting them. Otherwise, we do not sit with them because of the danger of the doubts that they carry, and that how they can affect your heart. And this is generally what the Shaykh is saying here, and their danger. So there's and for you to sit with these people and refute them, you have to be knowledgeable. You have to have the minimum requirements, a requisite knowledge. You can't just go there if you don't know, because they'll trick you, and you'll get confused, and you'll end up possibly in a very dangerous situation. So the prerequisite is to have the knowledge first before you go and debate them or refute them or advise them. Right? Other than that, you stay away from them. These are the heads of these of people. We're not talking about lay people. Lay people, they may be in because their families or their connections that they don't even know themselves. Those people, you give dawah to them. But we're talking about the heads of these people. They don't mix with the heads of these people. And don't obviously write off every single person from the lay people, because obviously a lay person doesn't know. The lay person needs guidance, needs to be guided. He's just following what his forefathers did. He doesn't even actually really know. He thinks it's actually okay. Yeah. So those people, no, don't cut them off. Don't cut the lay people off. But the heads of their people and the ones who are staunch upon their bid'ah, those are the ones we're talking about here, that the Shaykh's mentioning here. Then the Shaykh says that, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he aids his religion. We ask him to aid his religion, and that he foils the plots of the enemies. And then he sends prayers and salutations of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions. And inshallah, we will also finish here now when we finish this book, alhamdulillah. And inshallah, I will let you know via the Telegram group which book we will do next, inshallah. So hopefully we'll start either next week or the week after I've had a little think about, seek some advice about which book to go through next, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.